In the present day, Vancouver, British Columbia is one of the world's most praised cities. But how exactly did it get here? Having such a relatively young age for a major city, Vancouver must have had a storied history to get to where it is today. So, let's turn back the clock. Following the extension of the Canadian Pacific Railway west of Port Moody to the harbour, the city of Vancouver was officially incorporated in the year 1886. Despite the fact that the city had just got off the ground, tragedy has struck right away as in June of that same year, a fire broke out, killing at least 11 people and destroying an estimated 600 to 1,000 buildings. The residents of Vancouver responded quickly to this tragedy and started rebuilding immediately. The first police force was set up, the first brick buildings were built, and a fire engine was brought in from nearby New Westminster to prevent a similar event from ever happening again, effectively making Vancouver stronger. The following years would see the economy boom in the city, with the fishing, mining, and lumber industries expanding greatly. This was especially seen near the end of the First World War, though it was not an enjoyable time for anybody in this era. When compared to every other big city in Canada at the time, Vancouver sent more volunteers and more men per capita to fight in the war. This effectively lowered the population by about 26,000 people, and the city would not recover this number until the year 1919. According to the Canadian Great War Association, 1,401 Canadians who were killed in World War I had family or relatives in Vancouver, while many of the survivors from the war would come back with PTSD and life-altering injuries. Although the city would experience a decade of growth following the end of the war in the 1920s, life would quickly become hard again when the Great Depression hit. Canada, much like the rest of the world, was hit hard by the times, which in turn caused countless people all over the country to quickly go into poverty. Due to the fact that Vancouver has the mildest climate in Canada, many homeless would move to the city as to not freeze to death in other parts of the nation, which is a fact that is still relevant today. It is evident that much of the early 20th century was filled with nothing but hardships, but eventually, things would change. Following the end of the Great Depression and the Second World War, Vancouver began to grow quickly. Many people settled down and started families, and leisure time was more available, allowing people to live a life they couldn't really live in the earlier parts of the 20th century. The 1950s alone were a very eventful time for Vancouver. The city hosted the concert of music phenomenon Elvis Presley, as well as the 5th British Empire and Commonwealth Games, which was the first big instance of Vancouver being shown on the world stage. Significant buildings such as the Oak Ridge Mall and Queen Elizabeth Theatre were also built in this decade, giving more opportunities for people to use their leisure time to enjoy themselves. As the years went on, sports teams like the NHL's Vancouver Canucks, the CFL's BC Lions, and the original Vancouver Whitecaps Football Club would establish themselves in the area, building more culture in the city and supplying mostly enjoyment and satisfaction to the people. I would say they supplied a lot of disappointment too, but we'll ignore that. Although these were all crucial steps into making Vancouver the city it is today, the most impactful event would not come until late in the century. Expo 86 was a World's Fair hosted in the city that also lined up with Vancouver's centennial birthday celebration. The event was jam-packed with things to do. with visitors being able to experience pavilions, theaters, rides, and restaurants. Over 54 countries, 12 provinces or states, and many companies like Coca-Cola and McDonald's took part in the expo, helping make it a massive success that saw over 20 million visitors in its 5.5-month existence. There is no doubting the impact Expo 86 made on Vancouver, as it left a legacy that is still felt today. Important landmarks such as Science World, the Cambie Street Bridge, BC Place Stadium, and Canada Place were all created for Expo 86 specifically. Additionally, the Lower Mainland's light rapid transit system known as SkyTrain was also created for Expo 86, and has since expanded to the point where it is now the longest rapid transit system in Canada. People all around the world fell in love with Vancouver due to Expo 86, and it was truly a catalyst for change, transforming Vancouver from a sleepy town to the globally recognized city it is today. Although much good came from Expo 86, there was an unfortunate side to it. One of the lasting effects of Expo 86 was Vancouver housing prices skyrocketing, making it significantly harder for local buyers to purchase homes in the area. The worst thing that occurred due to the expo, however, happened in the months leading up to opening day. In the city's downtown east side area, more than 1,000 tenants were evicted from single-room occupancy hotels to make way for visitors. Because these residents were low income, many no longer knew where to live, and this was only further worsened by the fact that they were given as little as a day's to week's notice to leave. This fact about Expo 86 tends to be forgotten, much like a lot of Vancouver history that should be remembered. Although Vancouver in the present day is for the most part considered a city welcoming of all walks of life, it wasn't always that way. Let's travel back to the year 1967. Vancouver was going through a lot of change and growth, much like the rest of the world was post-World War II. Most decisions made by the city were positive, such as the building of the Granville Street Bridge and a new updated Second Narrows Bridge. Though even the Second Narrows Bridge was marred by tragedy as 23 workers were killed during construction, leading to it eventually being renamed the Iron Workers Memorial Bridge. One of the decisions the city made that was highly controversial was part of their plan for urban renewal. Included in this plan was the intention of bulldozing most of the Strathcona neighborhood and parts of Chinatown to make way for new housing and a network of freeways leading to the heart of Vancouver. Of course, it just so happened to be that Strathcona was known to be home to many different immigrant communities. Although the freeway plan was only publicly announced in 1967, the residents of Strathcona were already worried about the future of their community well before that, as by that time, 15 blocks of the neighborhood were already leveled for the new Georgia Viaduct. Among the destroyed property was much of Hogan's Alley, Vancouver's first and last predominantly black community. This effectively scattered the black population in Vancouver and left them searching for places to live in an era where housing discrimination was very prevalent. After the freeway plan was announced, Strathcona's residents had enough. They were naturally and rightfully furious, and they fought back hard against the city's plan. 2 residents, Walter and Mary Lee Chan, began hosting community meetings at their house calling for the cancellation of the project. These meetings led to the formation of the Strathcona Property Owner and Tenants Association, which built allies with government officials and successfully stopped the full freeway from becoming a reality. Today, the only evidence remaining of the planned freeway system is the Georgia and Dunsmuir viaducts, while Chinatown and the Strathcona neighborhood still stand to this day. Urban renewal wasn't the only instance of the city's darker past. Shortly after Japan's attack on the United States during the Second World War, Canada's federal government ordered any Japanese Canadians living 100 miles from the western coast to leave their homes immediately. This was despite the fact that the Canadian Army and Navy, as well as the RCMP, reported to the government that Japanese Canadians were absolutely no threat to national security. This sentiment was not shared by many British Columbians, however, as there was a strong anti-Japanese movement growing in the province. Numerous white farmers, merchants, and even politicians labeled Japanese Canadians as spies due to their racist beliefs and for their own economic gain. Following this order by the federal government, able-bodied Japanese Canadian men were sent to work in labor camps, while all other men, as well as women and children, were forced to live in absolutely deplorable conditions inside the livestock barns at the Peony Fairgrounds. It has been estimated that about 21,000 Japanese Canadians were forced from their homes on the West Coast during the war, not being allowed to return until 1949, a full 4 years after the war ended and 7 years after the government's order was first carried out. Anti-Asian racism has always been present in Vancouver, even before the Second World War. In the early 20th century, many immigrants in Canada were coming from Asian countries, most notably China, Japan, and India. Countless people in this time saw these immigrants as a threat to their jobs and way of life, when the main goal for immigrants was just to make a living for themselves. This hateful way of thinking erupted in the year 1907, when a crowd consisting of an estimated 4,000 to 8,000 white supremacists took to the streets shouting hateful messages and carrying racist signs. When the crowd reached Chinatown, they began violently vandalizing shops and homes, throwing rocks and beer bottles through windows, which caused thousands of dollars worth of damage. Though Vancouver is now praised for being a welcoming city, we must remember what it was built upon. Its storied history contained lots of amazing moments, but between those moments were painful memories that should never be forgotten and never be repeated. Though as Vancouver moves through the 21st century, new issues are being brought to light that must be addressed. Issues concerning enough to wonder if Vancouver is moving backwards.